Hi, everyone. Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch Top 20. David, only one major race for three-year-olds last week. It was the Tampa Bay Derby, won decisively by Owen Almighty. But there was a lot of question marks going in and coming out. So what's the story with Owen Almighty?
Yeah, it sounds like there may be 3 Kentucky Derby starters coming out of the Tampa Bay Derby, with the emphasis on the maybe when it comes to the winner, Owen Almighty, because he certainly has the points to get into the race after earning 50 Kentucky Derby qualifying points for that victory in the Tampa Bay Derby. Sounds like there's a bit of a split with the connections, though. The trainer, Brian Lynch, has been pretty explicit that he thinks this is more of a one-turn miler, but the connections in terms of the ownership group, they seem like they're catching Derby fever, which is pretty tough to resist at this point in the year, Brad.
Well, when you have a very good three-year-old, and Owen Almighty is a very good three-year-old, there's no doubt about that. Whether he's a mile and a quarter first Saturday in May type three-year-old is open to debate, but we'll talk about the Tampa Bay Derby and the addition of Owen Almighty to the top 20. Also, the second and third place finishers from the Tampa Bay Derby, Chancer McPatrick and Hill Road, will also go into detail on those. Before we go to the top 20 grid, David, let's talk a little bit about a Daily Racing Forum promotion that we are doing right now.
Yeah, we've got this Road to the Derby package. If you're somebody who handicaps on the weekends, these Derby prep days leading up to the first Saturday in May, and you're buying individual past performances for Fairgrounds for Louisiana Derby Day or Turfway for Jeff Ruby Stakes Day, and you're going to keep buying them for each week, well, just buy them all at once. You get saved 37%. You get those 10 events, including the Kentucky Oaks card, the Kentucky Derby card. You also get access to clock reports, betting strategies, and more of what's available for that. So investigate more about this promotion at shop.drf.com.
This is the time of year where everybody becomes a racing fan. And there's a look at our top 20 with the 2 additions to the list. Owen Almighty, he won the Tampa Bay Derby, and Hill Road finished a distant third. They're both new to the list, David.
Yeah, they're the 2 additions to this list, both horses coming out of that prep from last weekend. Both, I think, need to prove that they actually belong at the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Owen Almighty, when they kind of have the powwow among the ownership group, and Hill Road, I think he's got to earn a few more points to get into the race, but certainly an encouraging third place finish for him. They're both big prices on my early morning line for the Kentucky Derby at this point, because Owen Almighty, I think you have to have some reservations about the distance that he's ultimately going to handle on the first Saturday in May, and Hill Road has to run a faster race, but at least the latter of which is one that certainly has the potential to do so.
I have a lot of reservations regarding Owen Almighty. We'll talk about those when we get into the Tampa Bay Derby a little bit more in detail. And you're right about Hill Road. He'll have to run a lot faster than an 83 Beyer speed figure, which is what he earned finishing third in the Tampa Bay Derby. And the runner-up from the Tampa Bay Derby, Chancer McPatrick, he was already on the list. He knocked his price down just a few points from 30 to 25.
Yeah, any horse that Chad Brown gets into the Kentucky Derby is going to take some money, and it seems like he's setting himself up well to eventually make it into the starting gate on that first Saturday in May. He, I think, did what was required of him off the layoff in this prep race, and they'll look for some improvement next time out when he contests a 100-point prep. Needs a few more points, I think, to get into the race, but definitely a horse that's starting to work his way into contender status.
Well, with the addition of Hill Road and Owen Almighty to the top 20 list, we had to drop a couple to make room. One of those, my favorite maiden winner from California, Baeza, he moves to On the Bubble. He has 0 points. It's all or nothing in the Santa Anita Derby. So Baeza goes off the top 20 to On the Bubble. And the other horse we dropped, David, you were right about Patch Adams. His Southwest was not as good as I thought it was, and he did not run very well in the Tampa Bay Derby. He is also off the list.
Yeah, Patch Adams is a horse that had some major distance questions surrounding him, and it turns out that he just wasn't quite good enough against Stakes Company in this race. Probably not the ideal trip, getting floated a little bit wide by a long shot into the first turn, but I don't think it really mattered in the end. He was uncompetitive. And Baeza, I agree that he's a horse that seems to have some talent, Brad, but we're getting to that stage in prep season where points really do matter, and he's going to need to accrue all of his points in the Santa Anita Derby, which won't be easy.
No, well, not if journalism shows up and runs like he did in the San Felipe. And journalism remains the lowest price on the Derby Watch Top 20. We have 3. David has 3 second choices, Sovereignty, Barnes, and Citizen Bull. Not a whole lot of change this week among the top 20 with the addition of Hill Road and Owen Almighty, of course. So why don't we go ahead and start talking about the Tampa Bay Derby. field. David, there were two Derby Watch listers in the field going into the race, Chancer McPatrick and Patch Adams, and a horse that we have discussed and kind of summarily dismissed, Owen Almighty, but the Tampa Bay Derby played to Owen Almighty's strength, didn't it?
Yeah, I know neither of us were the biggest fans of the Sam F. Davis, the local prep for this Tampa Bay Derby, but Owen Almighty, I think you have to at least give him credit. He stepped up, ran a faster speed figure in victory here, earning a 92 buyer. He was benefited by the race flow because there were some other horses to the outside that looked like they had more tactical speed than they showed heading into that clubhouse turn, and it allowed Owen Almighty and Irad Ortiz Jr. to just back down this pace and really sprint away through the stretch. You could see him just really pick up his strides in the middle point of that stretch to open up on those two Chad Brown trainees, and then was geared down to the wire once he had it comfortably won. And this horse just continues to show up. He's very consistent. He's got that good tactical speed that's always going to make him dangerous in races that lack pace. However, Brad, we are familiar with the pace scenario in the Kentucky Derby. It does typically heat up under the Twin Spires for the first time, and tough for Owen Almighty to negotiate a faster pace and do it going the longest distance he's ever tried.
Well, Owen Almighty is not going to make the lead going a 48-second half mile in the Kentucky Derby. I don't like his chances. As of right now, in early March, I don't like his chances to go 1.25 miles in a race that, like you said, David, is typically loaded with speed. Now, if it was a paceless race and there was no speed, you might have to give Owen Almighty a second look, and I will give Owen Almighty another look pending his next prep race, wherever it is. Trainer Brian Lynch said if he goes into the Kentucky Derby, he wants one more prep race between now and then. If he goes straight to the Pat Day Mile, which is where he probably should be, Lynch is comfortable training him into that race. So we're going to monitor Owen Almighty, see where he shows up next. Lynch wants another prep race going into the Kentucky Derby, and he'll get it. Look, this is a very good horse. He's first or second across the wire in all 6 starts, but we're talking about 1.25 miles on the first Saturday in May in a race that's going to unfold at a wicked clip. And furthermore, Owen Almighty, up until that easy pace, easy trip win in the Tampa Derby, he had never really run a fast race, and I don't even know if 92 buyer qualifies as a fast race. To me, David, Owen Almighty has a lot left to prove.
He certainly does, and the connections are going to have to work out exactly what they want to do with this horse, because it seems like Brian Lynch has an idea in his head of what this horse does best, but the ownership group, I mean, they're relatively new participants in the game. I think they're excited to have a horse that's qualified for the Kentucky Derby, as anybody would be, and that's a tough temptation to pass up.
Well, when you have 65 points and you're into the Derby field virtually, it's a tough temptation to resist. Okay, so let's talk about the second and third place finishers from the Tampa Bay Derby that Owen Almighty soundly defeated, Chancer McPatrick and Hill Road. The question facing Chancer McPatrick going into this race, and Hill Road as well, their first start in 4 months, first start since the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last fall. Could Chancer McPatrick be as effective around 2 turns as he was last year around 1 turn when he won the Hopeful in Champaign? I don't believe, David, that the Tampa Bay Derby answered any questions with regards to Chancer McPatrick over a route of ground.
Yeah, I don't think it answered too many questions with regard to the distance, because he was finishing well at the end, but you're supposed to finish well when you get to, just sit behind a slow pace. So I don't want to just proclaim that he can handle 2 turns because he made up a little ground on Owen Almighty at the very end of the race. I think the positive takeaway for me with Chancer McPatrick from the Tampa Bay Derby, Brad, is that the addition of blinkers really did seem to get him a little bit more engaged early in the race. I know the pace was slow, but in his prior races, even when they weren't moving that quickly up front, he would just take himself out of contention early. Not so in that Tampa Bay Derby. He got right up into that pocket as they moved onto the backstretch and traveled keenly in behind horses. So I like to see that, a horse that just shows that greater engagement early in a race and still is able to produce a finish. We'll see how far he wants to go. He's another one that's going to have to run faster in his next prep race, but at least there was a little bit of that mental progression.
Well, he earned an 86 buyer for his comeback runner-up finish. Not that fast of a number, but the number was always going to come back relatively soft due to the soft pace and relatively slow final time. So an 86 buyer for Chancer McPatrick. He will start again before the Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure exactly. Chad Brown's going to split up his 2 horses, Chancer McPatrick and Hill Road. So as far as I'm concerned, as of right now, I don't think we know yet if Chancellor McPatrick can be as effective around 2 turns as 1. Maybe that answer will, become a lot more clear in his next prep race. But for now, I have to take a wait and see approach. The horse that I kind of like best coming out of the Tampa Bay Derby, and he actually got beat a long way, was Hill Road, making his first start since a good third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He was never close to Owen Almighty or Chancellor McPatrick, but after the wire, Hill Road galloped out like a beast. He galloped out like a horse who needed the start and who can improve next time out. Having said that, he got beat a long way and earned an 83 Beyer speed figure, so I don't want to give him too much credit either. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think the Tampa Bay Derby answered any questions among the top 3 horses.
Yeah, both of these Chad Prep runners galloped out pretty well in the Tampa Bay Derby. It looked like Hill Road was asked a little bit more to get something out of the gallop out, which is probably the most meaningful thing, because it seems like Chad Brown is cognizant of the fact that this horse had not so many workouts coming into this race, probably needed to get something out of the Tampa Bay Derby, so the jockey was allowed to ask for a little something after the wire. So that's a good sign for him to maybe take a step forward in his subsequent start. And I'm interested to see what Hill Road can do if he ever gets into a race that has more early pace, because both the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and the Tampa Bay Derby were races that were just dominated on the front end by horses that got to set pretty comfortable paces for them. And if Hill Road finds himself in a race, let's say like the Kentucky Derby, where they go really quickly and he still produces that strong finish, he could be a factor.
He definitely could be a factor. He has 24 Derby qualifying points. If he hits the board next time out in a 100-point race, 150-25, Hill Road is probably in the Kentucky Derby. But again, he has a lot left to prove. So does Owen Almighty, and so does Chancellor McPatrick. So to me, the only takeaway I can come out of the Tampa Bay Derby with is to say that, Patch Adams was not the horse that I thought he was. I think that all 3 have something left to prove. Fortunately, we get to watch them run one more time before they go toward the first Saturday in May at ChurchillDowns. So no questions answered in the Tampa Bay Derby. Okay, before we talk about the one stakes race that is this weekend, that's the Virginia Derby at Colonial Downs, let's talk about who is on the bubble and who is off the bubble. And the only addition to our on the bubble list is horse that got demoted from the top 20. That's Baeza, half-brother to Mage and Dornock, who was impressive, winning a maiden race last time out. His next start is in the Santa Anita Derby. David Getaway Car, with his 36 Derby points, he's on the bubble. Maybe we're underrating this horse, and I think that the Virginia Derby is kind of a race that he has to win, at least on paper. Grand, we don't know where he's going next. He's 2 for 2, and then we have the top 2 finishers from the first and third place finishers, John Hancock and Poster. John Hancock's win was validated when Owen Almighty came back to win the Tampa Bay Derby, and Poster, he's headed next to the Jeff Ruby at Turfway Park. What about these on the bubble, these 5 horses on the bubble, David?
Yeah, we already talked about Baeza. As far as Getaway Car is concerned, I mean, he only really needs a top 3 finish in the Virginia Derby to secure enough points to qualify for the Kentucky Derby. I think the most interesting thing to me, Brad, is going to be if Bob Baffert gets convinced to run the horse in the race, because I think you have to take note of the fact that Bob's 2 best chances for the Kentucky Derby, Citizen Bull and Barnes, are both horses that have done their best running on the front end. Getaway Car, also a front runner. Does Bob Baffert really want to have 3 front runners in the Kentucky Derby? I guess that remains to be seen, and maybe one of them can try out a different running style in their final prep race. But I'll be interested to see how that plays out if Getaway Car does make it into the Derby starting gate. And as far as John Hancock is concerned, I know some people might have expected him to be in the top 20 at this point off his Sam F. Davis win. He still has some things to prove from a speed figure standpoint. He'll get tested in the Louisiana Derby, which probably isn't coming up as the strongest prep, but it should be a competitive affair.
No doubt about it. A couple of horses we should at least mention who we've talked about before. Surfside Moon has been on the bubble for the last couple of weeks. He got sick out of the withers. This is according to DRF correspondent Dave Grenna, got sick out of the withers, and the connections of Surfside Moon are in no rush to make it to the Wood. They are under no pressure to make it to the Kentucky Derby. I like to hear that. I like to see that there's still some reasonable common sense thinking out there. So Surfside Moon, he's off the bubble, probably out of the Derby picture. And then another horse that we've talked about in the past, a horse by the name of Gaming, Grade 1 winner as a 2-year-old, had trained super for his comeback, which was expected to be in the Virginia Derby this coming weekend. he had a minor setback, and so Baffert switched gears, shipped Getaway Car to Colonial Downs, and kept Gaming at home. So we will monitor those two good colts, Surfside Moon and Gaming. And one other mention, a horse that we haven't talked about since he ran so poorly in the Risen Star, East Avenue, continues to train well, and I guess they're going to give him another shot in the Bluegrass. David, you and I are both skeptical about East Avenue, but you have to respect the connections of this very good colt, and when he runs at Keeneland, he'll be running over the track on which he scored the biggest win of his career last fall. What about the likes of East Avenue?
Yeah, he's a real wild card heading into that race, and I guess we'll have to see how the pace scenario is going to shape up in that Bluegrass, because he is a horse that has run his two best races, really his only two good races, when he's controlled things on the front end. I guess we'll see in that race if he needs that scenario to be successful.
That will be 100 points to the winner race, 50 to the runner-up, 25 points for third, the Bluegrass on April 5th. Early April is when it all shakes out as far as the Derby Trail goes. But there is a big race this weekend. It's 50 points to the winner. It's a one-turn, mile and 1/8 race. It's the Virginia Derby, the first time a Kentucky Derby points race has been held at Colonial Downs. There will be a key scratch out of here. Number 2, John Hancock, as David mentioned, he's going to wait and scratch out of this race, go into Louisiana Derby next weekend. That's according to DRF correspondent Marcus Hirsch. That makes it even easier, I believe, for Getaway Car. David, the more I look through this race, I just don't see how Getaway Car gets beat unless a mile and 1/8 is too far. What about you? What are you looking for from Getaway Car?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way the Getaway Car potentially gets beat in this race is if the pace really heats up down that long straightaway run, the one turn, mile and 1/8 distance. There's a long run to the only turn, and sometimes in those elongated one turn routes, the pace can get pretty quick on a straightaway. And if horses like American Promise or potentially even Georgia Magic, the long shot on the outside, who's shown speed in some shorter races, apply pressure to Getaway Car, maybe that exposes some stamina limitations, because I've got some real questions about how far Getaway Car really wants to run, but based on the speed figures that he's running class, he definitely is the horse to beat in this race.
Well, based on who he's been running against, he's been running against the best, 2-year-olds in California. He had a good comeback win in the Sunland Derby. He earned a 92 Beyer speed figure. That's the top figure of his career. I just don't see him getting beat in the Virginia Derby this weekend. He's listed at 9-5 on the morning line, but that's before the scratch of John Hancock. And John Hancock was listed as the second choice. So I can see Getaway Car. David, just off the top of your head, with John Hancock not in the race, what price is Getaway Car likely to start off?
Oh, I've got to think he's going to be somewhere in the even money range. I mean, there are other horses to make cases for in this race, but he figures to be a clear favorite, especially with, I think, Irad Ortiz hopping aboard for this race. I mean, that's a jockey that typically takes plenty of money in his own right. So Getaway Car figures to be somewhere close to odds-on territory. And here, maybe he should be, because while he hasn't won all these stakes races, you can see in these past performances, he has kept really good company and has not been disgraced by horses like Journalism and Citizen Bull. So they've all got him to catch.
Very good colt is Getaway Car. And he's another one of those horses that we're not knocking his ability. We're just wondering if a mile and 1/4 in May at Churchill Downs is the right trip for him. Second choice is likely to be Rapture. His maiden win was decisive last time out. David Rapture, he only got an 82 Beyer speed figure. Is that worth, backing him in this race at a relatively short number?
Yeah, I don't really see the value with him, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I did a preview of this race with Mike Beer as the DRF Saturday race of the day, so you can also get some free past performances of the Virginia Derby on the Daily Racing Form website if you want to handicap this race. But Rapture is a horse that is going to need to run a lot faster if he's going to upset Getaway Car, and it feels like he's going to be a pretty short price in this race, especially with Brad Cox only starting one and Flavian Pratt keeping the mount on this horse. And for a horse that could be a clear second choice, I still think he has a lot to prove.
I do too. I don't think that 3-1 offered any value, and he could potentially even go shorter than that. There's one crazy horse in the race. I don't know how crazy it is. I thought number 3, American Promise, only because I know that he has run a fast number in the past. It was a maiden win on a wet track at Oaklawn Park, so put a big asterisk by that performance if you need to. But he did run fast, at least that one time, American Promise. Any chance at all, David, for this D. Wayne Lucas trainee?
I mean, he ran his best race when he was able to set the pace. It's going to be tough for him to do that breaking inside of Getaway Car in this race. But as you said, he's got some fast speed figures, which not everybody in this field does. So I think you at least have to consider him under that scenario. And I mean, the horse that I'm a little bit interested in to maybe pick up pieces is Omaha, who has been closing well and should at least like this 9 furlong distance, which I can't say about everybody in this field.
No doubt about that. Well, it's an interesting race. The Virginia Derby on Saturday at Colonial Downs. Getaway Car expected to be heavily favored. I'll be surprised if he gets beat. We are less than 2 months out from the Kentucky Derby. We'll analyze the Virginia Derby next week and look toward the following week when the points become a lot more valuable. 100 points to the winner, 50 to the runner-up. That begins March 22nd with the Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway Park and the Louisiana Derby at Fairgrounds. We will cover it all next week on Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch Top 20. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. See you next week.